Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello, I hope you had a good weekend. Yes, Arsenal are playing perhaps the most important game of the season, but here I am on my FPL podcast. If you told me this, I was saying in the chat before we started 10 years ago, I'd have thought you were crazy. But here we are, Sam. It burrows into your brain like a worm, doesn't it? And you feel like you just can't miss it, the appointed time. And not long to go now, as we're entering the twilight zone of the season. And as trailed, this week we're bringing back the WGTA vibes with some proper deep diving that's been uncharacteristically missing from recent pods, with our practical sort of focus on what's going on next week, all the chips going on, and dear God, do I need it. It's been a pretty horrible couple of weeks, as we'll speak about later, with my season at this point pretty much over. But I'm still here, summoning up enthusiasm through liquid courage and also just kind of my general enjoyment for podcasting and doing the show to keep the show on the road and still hopefully assist all of you with your good finishes. So maybe we, Sam, can finish well vicariously through a lot of you, and at least feel like we did a good job this year. For you, maybe not for ourselves. Either way, I promise this won't necessarily be a somber pod, but we all have a little section where we mourn the deaths of maybe my season, I think, and you call time of death already on yours, but we'll see if you still feel that way. Joined by Sam, as always. How are you, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm in a much more buoyant mood this week. I guess I've had time to mourn the death of my season, so I'm in a much more holistic mood, I suppose. I'm happier with everything going on around. So, yeah, all okay. I am a little bit further behind than you, though. So if we're calling death on yours, mine is definitely gone. And you've got some players to play as well on Thursday, as do I. I've only got one left on my free hit. But I think you've got, is it 3 players left, Tom?
Yeah, I've got this Milenkovic and then Bumo as well.
Yeah, nice. So let's not give up hope just yet, but we'll go into
this. It's gone, Sam. It's all over. It's all over. It's all over. Go on, let it go. It's fine. It's fine. We are vibes now. It's pure vibes for the rest
Positive
of the year.
Energy only on this pod today, guys. So as always, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we'll do a quick roundup of team updates. I'm on a free hit. Tom is not, as I'm sure you will have gathered already. We'll obviously have a little bit of a retrospective on the last few weeks and what may have gone wrong, but we won't dwell on it for too long. We know that we don't want to just moan about our own seasons and annoy everyone listening. So we'll move on quickly from that to the main topic today, which is all about beachiness. We talk about it quite regularly. We talk about it, I think, most seasons, if not all, about whether or not a team is on the beach going into the last few game weeks of the season. And I think this season in particular is kind of an interesting subject to approach now, because there are a very big pool of teams and players that could arguably be considered on the beach going into the final month of the season, the final 4 game weeks. Usually there's a lot more riding on the last 3 or 4 game weeks, and there's very little now. So we'll go into that, have a look at which teams via the Premier League table are most likely to be on the beach and which are fighting tooth and nail for every position they can. Obviously, European football is still very much up for grabs for a number of them, and obviously how that affects our decision-making as FPL managers for the rest of the season. Of course, game week preview, knee-jerk, a space for Tom to maybe mourn his season, possibly me as well if there's time. Best transfers, bold claims, best captains, which is, I think, a really interesting discussion this week, Tom. And finishing, of course, with our teams and how we're setting up going into game week 35 and the back 4 game weeks of the season. It is Tuesday, the 29th of April. Forest Brentford is on Thursday, so we're yet to wrap up the game week, really. But we couldn't wait that long, considering that the deadline is a Friday evening. So we needed to get this pod out there to hopefully help all of you. And of course, as we know, the Arsenal game is going on in the background. So if you hear any cheers, cries, moans in the background, that's probably Tom having a quick look at the score. Shall we get started with the game week reviews as it stands, Tom?
Go on then.
Right. I think just the order of the slides dictate I usually tend to go first. I'm not sure why. We should probably switch this up from time to time. I am on a free hit, which I know a number of you listening will be. I don't think my score's as blockbuster as I've seen out there. And I think the vast majority of what I've seen in the community has beaten me this week. But it is a green arrow nevertheless. And when you look at the averages on a free hit, if you're listening and you've not been on Twitter or Blue Sky or posting much about it because you're feeling like maybe my score's not that great on a free hit compared to some of those that you're seeing around, let me at least be a beacon of hope for you. I'm on 77 points with a player to play, that being Mbermo on Thursday. And honestly, if I hadn't looked around and seen everyone else's scores, I'd be pretty happy with it. My whole defense returned. Pope and Livramento, both 6-pointers. We'll come on to Trippier in a moment. Ait Nuri with 11. Couldn't have asked for more, really. Kukurea with 6 and was, I think, fairly unfortunate not to get an attack and return there. Into the midfield, Luis Diaz returned. Salah obviously returned as my captain. Palmer was the disappointment. And again, he's been a disappointment for a while. So possibly one that we maybe should have looked at a bit more closely. But I still stand by the decision making. And then up top, it was Isak with a return. I didn't captain him though, and he was over 100% EO, so it did hurt me. Cunha obviously did very well with a goal, two assists and bonus points, which just goes with the territory of being Matheus Cunha, apparently. And Raul Jimenez was a disappointment in terms of the outcome. In terms of the performance, I think he was a bit unlucky as well. I think 7 shots in the box, had, I think, a header that he should have done a lot better with, and obviously got the booking against Southampton too. So I think for me, Tom, it was more of a case of the players I missed out on rather than the players I did have. It felt that every player that I could have picked but didn't quite ended up returning in quite a big way, especially on the Saturday. So Trippier, 15 points. And Sessegnon as well, stuck on my bench with 11. I was a little bit, well, I still kind of stand by the decision making. I don't think Sessegnon would have necessarily even started if it wasn't for Robinson getting a mystery injury, considering that Harry Wilson actually started right wing and Sessegnon played left back anyway. Getting the goal in the last minute felt a bit fortunate, but fair enough. Obviously, he was well owned and I understand the logic for going there. But if I'd seen the team sheet and he'd been left back, I probably wouldn't have picked him. So I kind of stand by that decision making. Trippier, I don't think has had an attack and return all season up until this point, and then obviously returns twice. So I don't really regret the decision making. The outcome's been relatively poor, and if I'd picked up either one of them or Jose Sarr in goal, which I know we'll come on to in a second, my score would have looked actually pretty nice, and I would have been sat probably closer to 250k, and I would have maybe had a little bit more hope. But as it is, 77, just inside the top 300k right now, and Mbermo to play, so it's not been as big a mover of a game week as I needed it to be. So I think any hopes of top 100k are probably gone now. But a green arrow nevertheless.
Yeah, it's been the story of it's been the story of the season for you and for me, that it's been a case of kind of so close yet so far, really, hasn't it? I think we were saying kind of in our kind of WhatsApp chat that whatever configuration of players that you chose, you were always going to somehow end up just missing out on one or two, or just, however it kind of goes. Like, look at me last week, I'm missing out on Trossard and missing out on Bumo, players who I was sort of considering but didn't make the cut. Same for you with those players that you cited. And we looked at your team, didn't we, sort of on the Friday, and I was just saying, well, this team looks great, and it's just the case that a couple of I suppose late entries in some ways to a lot of free hit teams, Trippier particularly kind of comes to mind, truly did the business. But yeah, I mean, a green is a green is a green. And you're right to kind of just highlight the fact that, people who have done the best will shout the loudest, and it may cow people into thinking, oh, you know what, actually, maybe this is actually a bit of a fail. And I don't think that's the case, really. Especially if you're doing better than us, if you manage the green despite kind of not hitting the heady heights of triple figures, I think you're probably still going to count that as a win for this week. So yeah, good for you all round.
On
In
to you.
contrast, it was not good for me, Sam. I'm on 49 net, 57 minus 8. I'll keep this brief and talk a bit more on the knee jerk or what this means for my season. But I brought in Bowen, Bumo, and Visser for Asensio, Sarr, and Mateta. Decided to just kind of get 11 men on the pitch, and then found Sarr was fit. So I got 11. But ultimately, not owning Cunha and ignored to some extent, but not owning Cunha really was the fatal blow here. But we'll see what Wissa has to say about that on Thursday. But I doubt it will be at the same extent of Cunha. Hindsight says I should have brought Cunha in captain. That's what kind of the intrusive thought in my brain immediately went to on Saturday night. But I simply didn't consider it much last week. I think that it's one of those things that I can't really beat myself up about. Didn't captain Salah, went for Isaac in the end. Missed two big chances in succession in the 35th, 36th minute, something like that. And I think from that point onwards, I was just thinking, yeah, you know what? I'm going to be honest, Sam. I switched off from FPL for the weekend. I kind of just removed all notifications on SofaScore.
Yeah,
silenced the Slack chat. Silence the FPL groups and just kind of enjoy time with my daughter, because sometimes you kind of just like, well, it's not a mental health thing, as I said. It's just one of those things where you're like, well, it's going to be a bad week. There's no point in me continuing to look at it, and it's just it's just one of those things that I had to kind of spend time processing. I'm fine at the moment, fine now, but I think if you'd done this pod on Saturday or Sunday, I'd have been very kind of defeatist and down in the dumps, just because that's the nature of being human about this. But yeah, it's not been the best week in the world, but hey ho, that's kind of what happens. Bright spots were obviously the random variants of a Jose Sarr pen save. Bowen, I did bring in, thinking that the Brighton, the Potter derby, Brighton West Ham would be quite. I think I kind of pegged it as a 2-2, and the late goal from Belieber slightly took it away from that, and also cost me a 3-pointer in my predictions league, which was a pain in the ass. But yeah, Bowen with a pair of assists, and obviously got a three players to go, but 20 plus points off safety, 2 red arrows in a row on weeks where I've played my free hit as well. It is pretty bad, and I'll talk about this a bit more later on the knee jerk. But now, I think let's talk about beachiness. So there's a little bit of exposition here needed, unfortunately. So it'll just be a little bit of me talking for a little bit. Promise that we'll get to Sam's dulcet tones in just a second. But on screen, you've watched on YouTube, and we'll talk about this as well. It's a Premier League table in order with points totals in the real world and not the FPL points, fixtures for the last 4, XG and XGC for the last 10 weeks, and then our highly, highly qualitative beachiness score on the right-hand side. It's obviously beachiness or X motivation, being on the beach, is highly qualitative. It's really worth saying that up front. We know that this is kind of a little bit for fun, and also just I think to talk about what the impacts are for FPL managers, because I think those are things which are tangible and can be kind of tangified in what we do in terms of our decisions and how they pay off. And we saw in the free hit that targeting the teams who have gone down and whose motivation is perhaps lower has paid off. And the Athletic actually wrote an article on this on Monday and said it's pretty much impossible to quantify. We've tried to do this down the years on WGTA. Former co-host Anthony /Stag famously spent an evening trying to figure out some correlation between points totals and motivation at the end of the year, and that ended up basically banging his head against the wall in reality, and it was just impossible to measure. So we'll go through, give those scores, and I guess debate exactly what this all means and how we could use it. But one thing really when it comes to this, when it comes to kind of on the beach X motivation, something you hear about a lot when we reach the business end of the season, as Sam mentioned earlier on, is basically the idea that as the sands of time drain away, we end up with teams essentially having nothing to play for in terms of a league position, and it's predominantly sort of viewed through the lens of where's motivation coming from? Is it from a title challenge? Well, that's not happening this year. Potential qualification from a European for European competition, which is happening this year, or escaping relegation, which again, nothing doing this year. There's also some suggestion that you get 2.8 million, I think it is, per position in the Premier League, but I'm not sure anyone particularly cares about that in terms of the riches of the Premier League this time round. But yeah, in terms of the race for Europe, which I think is what the key sort of thing is that's going to dictate whether we deem a team to be on the beach and their kind of level of beachiness or not. And this gets really complex, and Sam and I were sending quite a lot of messages earlier on about this. But the skinny is the Premier League get 5 Champions League places now, thanks to the coefficient wonders, 2 Europa League places and 1 Conference League place. And it could be, there's lots of manifestations that can make this happen, that all the way to 10th in the Premier League this year could qualify for the Conference League at the very least. But typically the top 5 qualify for Champions League. Normally it's 4, but because our coefficient is so good, it's now 5th. 6th is the Europa League, 7th is the Conference, and also cups. So the Carabao Cup winners get a Conference League place, and the FA Cup winners get a Europa League place. And if the winner of either cup qualifies for a superior competition, so Newcastle, the Carabao Cup winners, have the Conference League place, but if they qualify for the Champions League, which is looking like it could well happen, the place in the competition they qualify for gets passed down to the next eligible team, effectively. So it doesn't go to 7th, their Conference League place, it goes to the team in 8th, and so on and so forth. There's a bit more kind of complication this year because you've got Man United and Spurs in the latter stage of the Europa League. Chelsea are favourites to win the Europa Conference League, which means you've got loads of different teams who could possibly be in Europe next year representing England. And Man United and Spurs would get their kind of Champions League players without any infringement on the 5 allocated space we've got due to the UEFA's coefficients. And we found today, for a lot of ferreting, that if Chelsea do win the Conference League, but they either are already qualified for the Europa League or qualify for the Champions League, that spot doesn't go to the Premier League. It goes to, I couldn't really work it out. Like some suits in a dark room basically figure this one out somewhere in a bunker in Zurich. But that spot goes to the teams of the highest qualifying associations in earlier round who are promoted accordingly, is the wording from UEFA's website, which is clear as mud. But anyway, the upshot is that up to 5th is the Champions League, 6th all the way down to Palace, arguably in 12th, are in the hunt for other European qualification. Very remote for Palace and kind of remote for Brentford, albeit with a game in hand. I think Brentford may be in with a shout. Palace in particular, if they don't win the FA Cup, if they do that, they'll get into the Europa League. They're relying on teams around them, basically losing lots of games, then winning basically all the rest of their games, other circumstances favouring them, similar to some extent for Brentford. So that's kind of the skinny. That's kind of where we are right now. And I think, Sam, that I suppose leads us to really zero in immediately on teams who are sort of on the beach and teams who are not on the beach. And I don't know, does it feel like this year it's a lot clearer almost where exactly those teams lie in the table?
Yeah, I think, well, by the way, beautifully explained, Tom. Very well done there. Yes, I think it is a little bit more simple to determine which teams are fighting pretty hard and which aren't at this point, mainly because so many of the different interesting things that you usually fight for at the end of the season are already wrapped up. Liverpool have won the league. Relegation fight, if you'd even call it a fight, is now done. So it is all on Europe, and it's all on just a few places in that top half of the table, like you said. And each of those teams have different, like maybe varying amounts of motivation anyway. I mean, in Arsenal, you could argue, okay, they're not completely locked into the Champions League or in that top 5 places, but it's almost impossible that they wouldn't get it. And even teams like Newcastle, Man City would probably be quite confident at this point, but you would certainly not call them on the beach. They'll still be fighting. But again, Man City have other competitions to focus on. Chelsea do, Man United do as well. So they probably aren't bothered about the league in any way. Basically, long story short, there's a pool of players that will definitely be on the beach. We've given it up to a 5 beachiness rating, so 0 to 5. There's a number that are a 0, and those are basically all of the teams still actively fighting for those European spots. And then there's different variations of the 1 to 5 rating of beachiness, which we'll go through to determine whether or not these teams are really bothered about Premier League football for the last few weeks of the season, or in some cases, which I think is an interesting debate to maybe have at this juncture, Tom, does being on the beach actually, if anything, aid some teams? I think we saw it last year with Palace. They had almost nothing to play for, and they felt almost free and unencumbered and could basically just go about their business, smashing teams all around the place. And maybe there's a few teams, arguably Wolves potentially this season, where they're certainly not fighting for anything, but they just seem in a really good rhythm at the moment, and they feel almost the pressure's off their shoulders and they can just go out and play each season. So it'll be an interesting debate to get into on some of these teams. Just because they're on the beach doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a terrible team to be targeting players from.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of hints with the Palace example. I'm not saying you're wrong, but it links to the nebulous sort of nature of this discussion, because you could also say, because Glasner came in, that it was a new manager bounce. Despite them being on the beach, they suddenly had that extra sort of bit of motivation that was going on there. And we are reading the tea leaves here. We really are. It's very difficult to kind of pretend otherwise. That's why I kind of say it is a qualitative sort of analysis, really, more than anything else. But I suppose there are sort of, potential knock-ons for FPL managers, depending on how you read the situation and what your narrative is in your mind, I suppose. So, on one side, it's kind of easy to target teams on the beach, teams who are already relegated, teams whose focus is entirely elsewhere. I mean, to start from the bottom, I think, and begin to bring this table in, you know, Southampton, Leicester, Ipswich, Spurs, and United. Well, we've got Southampton as a free, actually. We'll come on to that in just a second because there's an important caveat there. But Ipswich, Leicester, Spurs, and United are all teams, for different reasons, you're probably going to want to be targeting for the rest of the year. Hence why I bought Bowen, because he's got United and Spurs coming up. Just because their minds are going to be elsewhere, which was probably going to affect their Premier League performances. In the case of United and Spurs, their only motivation, especially for the game week coming, is going to be on the next leg, depending on what happens actually in the Europa League first leg this weekend. This midweek. But I think that kind of does have a tangible impact on who you are going to be looking at. And whether you kind of agree with our analysis or not, I think that it's incontrovertible to say that these are the teams you are going to be thinking, there's a fixture against this team this week. If you've got a Brentford player and you're playing it, then they're playing United this week, or you're looking to buy players from Brentford this week, you are going to be buying them because they've got United fixture on the way. On the other side, though, especially where you've got teams who are both on the beach playing each other, there's more unpredictability. And it might be the case that, more goals might be going on. Less motivation equals less ability to keep it tight, a qualitative point, but maybe that kind of focus that comes with having a goal when it comes to your Premier League place and when it comes to your tactics, etc., does sort of, I suppose, lead to kind of less goals being scored. But when that goes away, when there's that sort of lesser instinct, I suppose, or that lesser motivation, maybe we do see a few more goals being scored around the place. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, Sam, that it is kind of a case of reading the tea leaves. But I do think, whether you believe this or not, whether you think that it's tangible or not, there is going to be some qualitative element that kind of comes into your decision making when you are sizing up motivation, beachiness, whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah, completely agreed. And I think a number of those teams that you mentioned there, I think there's always going to be nuances. So Spurs and Man United, I think, are two interesting sides to be talking about at this juncture, because I think, despite the fact that they're both 5 out of 5 on the beachiness rating, I completely agree with both of those, by the way. I think, if anything, I'd just give the crown to Spurs just that little nudge more. It'd almost be give them an extra beachiness point. And the reason for that is Amorim's going nowhere over the summer. He's going to be building a squad over the break and trying to go again next season and trying to strengthen players, although they will inevitably be on the beach in terms of eyes on the Europa League for the next 2 weeks at the very least, possibly further. I think there's still a chance that come game week 38, the players are going to be fighting for him. And with Spurs, the way I'd best characterize what I saw against Liverpool would be a cat sort of lazily swatting away a fly, hovering around at it for a little bit, putting up the minimal amount of fight it could to begin with. And the second something came along, giving it any sort of proper fight, it just rolled straight over. And Spurs felt like that to me over the weekend. Yes, Liverpool are a fantastic side, nothing against them, but Spurs, once they'd scored and then finally conceded the first, it felt like all the fight was gone from them. And I don't know whether you watched the game, Tom, but that's certainly how it felt to me. And I think the reason that I'd almost class Spurs as even more beachy than Man United at this point, not only are they only focused on the European competition, but also, even if they win that European competition, I still think it's very unlikely that Postecoglou gets the summer. I just don't see how he survives, considering he's been in the job for almost 2 full seasons now, and they're currently 16th in the Premier League. All excuses aside, I just can't see a universe where players think that he's going to be their manager this time next season or at the start of next year. So they're not even going to be playing for him after the Europa League's out of the way. So I think Spurs, for multiple reasons, compound to be the ultimate beachy team right now. Again, that might just mean more goals, like you say, because we know Spurs are capable of scoring goals, but it certainly means that more goals conceded as well is likely. And Man United, again, I watched the game against Bournemouth, and the sense I got wasn't of a team that's on the beach necessarily, more of a team that's trying to conserve energy. And I think they are still fighting for the manager. They are still trying to figure out a bit of a way of playing and a system that will suit them going into next season. So I still probably would target them, especially around the European competition, because they might rest players or they might just not be fully committed to tackles or running the extra yards, all of that stuff. That makes them a good team to target. But I still think they're fighting for the manager. And I still think there's something there for Man United. Whereas with Spurs, I just can't see what the motivation is at this point. And it does feel very much just biding their time to the end of the season. If they can get a European trophy out of it, then obviously that's a win. But they're just not fighting for it in the league at this point, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's completely right. And I think it kind of, again, feeds into this idea that, yeah, you're, I guess, the ultimate sort of end. We're using the term beachiness, but I think it is motivation, really, which is sort of what the core thing that we're trying to get at here. And you're completely right to point out that with Spurs, the fact is that if you're playing for a manager who's not likely to be there, that's going to have a significant impact if the message, or at least, you know, you're conscious of the fact that, you know, the league doesn't matter, and in fact the entire season's success or failure hinges on a few games which are outside of the league, and that's going to have an obvious psychological impact. So I'd absolutely have them there. With United, you've got the European factor, and you've also got the fact that the manager is probably very likely to be there next year, which is going to have that impact on players who are going to want to kind of be playing for their futures, essentially, in a lot of ways. Whereas for Spurs, I think the idea would be a new broom, new manager comes in, and things sort of change. I think United and the likes of West Ham and Everton, who are again at the bottom, towards the bottom of the table, all of these teams are 14th and below. United, Everton, and West Ham might perhaps sort of group together in that, because you've got, you know, the Potter with the longest pre-season history, Moyes, you know, good times kind of coming with the move from out of Goodison to the new stadium, and you know, the newish manager there in Moyes with decent fixtures as well. We've still sort of said that, you know, they're pretty beachy. Let's be honest. But at the same time, the fact is that they've got managers there who are likely to be there next year. Players do have some semblance of an incentive to be playing up for their manager. But I mean, we saw it with Bowen versus Fulkrug in terms of the response to the Southampton game, when you had Bowen just being like, yeah, you know, whatever, it is what it is. Whereas Fulkrug launching what was a very, very fun, sort of honest
tirade.
Yeah, we'll call it a tirade against his teammates, which is just fair enough, and to some extent. But I think that kind of just, in some ways, crystallizes sort of where these teams are right now. That, yeah, okay, there's some sort of notion that they're going to have some semblance of motivation. The manager's still going to be there. Hopefully, they're sort of training towards next season. But hey, you know what? There's a big summer involved in between. The idea that you kind of carry a momentum from the end of the last year into the new year, probably one of those things I'm not going to get on board with in terms of an assertion for what happens going forward. But still, I think that, you know, all of these teams do sort of, I suppose, blend into one in some way in terms of being categorized as being fairly beachy. Now, earlier on, Sam, I sent you the first draft of this. You said, you know, Southampton maybe not a 5, maybe put them down to a 3 versus the other teams that I've mentioned, Ipswich and Leicester, United and Spurs, all in the 5, West Ham, Everton, both on 4s, just because maybe there's a semblance of something going on there. Everton in particular have quite decent fixtures coming up. Yeah, Southampton on a 3 though, Sam. I mean, why is that?
Yeah, so it's important to note at this point that beachiness rating doesn't have any correlation necessarily with team ability. So just because there are 3 on the beachiness rating doesn't mean that they have the ability to put up the fight, which they don't. But what I should say on Southampton is, we're certainly not fully on the beach right now, mainly because we don't deserve a holiday. But the second point being that we're still joint with Derby for the worst ever Premier League season. And I know that there's a lot of internal pressure going on behind the scenes at the moment to make sure that they scrape even an extra point out of it. Leicester is obviously the game that they will probably target for that point, if not hopefully more. Everton as well is a sort of a last shot at it, but they will hang their heads in shame if we don't manage to at least get past 11 points. So they are still fighting for something. They've got the new, assistant manager stepping up for the time being. So they're kind of playing for him a little bit. Again, this doesn't have any impact on their ability to stop the flow of traffic, but I wouldn't quite classify them as fully on the beach. They're still maybe trying their best to fight if they possibly can. Whereas, Ipswich and Leicester, Van Nistelrooy is never going to be in the job next season, surely, and they're probably just going to brush away most of their big players come the summer. Ipswich, McKenna's not going anywhere. You wouldn't think, at least, and will probably be resetting for the Championship. Not much to prove in the Premier League anymore, so they probably do qualify as slightly more on the beach than Southampton.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So Wolves, probably next up. So I mean, obviously a very kind of decent run, 6 wins and 6 against teams that we probably were going to say teams that they should probably be beating. I think we kind of I think they're just a little bit too far off the European qualification place. Someone's just noted, and you're completely right, that I've got fixtures wrong for a couple of teams there, unfortunately, because BRI and BHA often get called the wrong thing, so I've copied and pasted them wrong. Sorry about that. But it's not going to have that much effect on the story, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, Wolves, I think are probably the next, probably kind of still in that sort of beachy area from now on. Fixtures kind of going forward. Had a really good recent run. I suppose the main sort of source of interest for them, in contrast to apart from maybe Everton, where you might have some interest in them, especially at the back for Ipswich and Southampton in 35 and 37. For Wolves, the main interest is a potential double more than anything else, because it kind of feels like, they're safe now, and they're going to have perhaps more of a challenge over the next few games than they have over the last little kind of period of time.
Yeah, I mean, look, their form's been great, but like you just highlighted, the fixtures have kind of helped them on their way to good form. Look, the gamble on Pereira has paid off. They look like a much better side, a much more well-drilled side, disciplined. They're getting the best out of Cunha and Strand Larsen, Bellegarde, Manetzi. They're all doing really well. No question about that. In terms of the fixtures, I think the main appeal probably would come in if the unlikely situation were to occur where the Wolves Crystal Palace game were to be brought forward from game week 37 to game week 36. At time of recording, we've not had an announcement on that. It's possible that it could. I think a lot of the predictors still think that it's likely to go ahead in game week 37, just push back to the midweek in 37. So that would probably remove a little bit of the interest in Wolves assets, but I certainly wouldn't hate going for someone like Acuna. He could easily get a return in each of those 4 games, even the one against Man City. I wouldn't put it past him. And as we know, a return is worth a lot more for Cunha than it is most other assets, because he's just a magnet for bonus points. So yeah, look, they are on the beach, but possibly in that good way I hinted at earlier, where they're enjoying the new manager bounce. They're certainly fighting for the manager. They're building into a system that works, a la Crystal Palace last year, and they're on an upwards trajectory. And winning form usually helps boost spirits and morale, and hopefully they can keep that going until the end of the season. And certainly that's the message the manager and the staff will be trying to drill into the players, that this good feeling can last if they can end the season on a high. And yeah, they're not really fighting for too much. Europe's probably a bit far away for them at this point in time, but I still think they're in a bit of a good spot at the moment, and probably in a celebratory mood, rather than a beachy in the sense of we'll just see out the rest of the season and go again next year and reset. I think they're trying to build something at the moment. So yeah, a 4 on the beachiness rating, but maybe that's not such a bad thing with Wolves.
Yeah, no, it depends whether it kind of I don't know why, but I kind of immediately thought Tony Pulis' West Brom, where they got to 40 points every year and then
Yeah.
proceeded to stop scoring goals and stop keeping clean sheets. And
Yeah.
I wonder whether there's going to be a feeling that, all right, we've had our really good run of fixtures. The job's sort of done here. We'll see what Man City can do versus them, because they are a team, Man City, who we've kind of said are very much sort of not on the beach. And they start to kind of take us into the teams in the European qualifying race. Now, Palace are arguably on the borderline. I had a couple of iterations of this where it kind of the line was drawn underneath Brentford, or it was underneath Palace, and they're quite an interesting case, aren't they, Sam? Because a lot of managers are going to have three of their players. Nottingham Forest at home on Monday night, I think, is the 35 fixture, and you've also got the fact that they've got the FA Cup final coming after a really good victory against Aston Villa. And a lot of this, I think, is going to feed into kind of how you view them in terms of beachiness races. We've got them as a 2 out of 5, potentially. Mixed bag of fixtures, fair to say, of the next few, but attacking wise, actually, over the last little while, they've been really, really good. They are in the top 5 for XG over the last 10 game weeks. I suppose there's been extra doubles in there, but I don't know how much that actually impacts things. And yeah, I mean, there's an interesting conundrum on the table for FPL managers, but I suspect, Sam, we will probably see people maybe turn away from Palace assets, especially with kind of juicier other options that are potentially on the table.
Yeah, I think so. Possibly Mateta is the easiest one to start moving on if you've got him, because there are a couple of strikers like Wissa, like Cunha, maybe like Watkins as well, that you can get to relatively comfortably with good fixtures, and a lot of them are either in a celebratory mood or fighting for something. With the midfielders, it's an interesting one, because I was planning on possibly shifting away from a Sarr or Eze, if you've got him as well, around about now. But looking at the fixtures as they currently lie, I kind of don't hate them. Nottingham Forest have been historically a very good defence, but if you look at the last 10 game weeks, I think they're 4th from bottom in terms of XGA, looking at this graphic now. So they've certainly dropped off defensively. After that, they've got Spurs away from home in game week 36, then Wolves, then Liverpool. So I think by the time you get to 38, you probably want rid of them, or maybe bench and Munoz that game week, for example, get rid of the rest. But I think you can hold on to them. I don't think it's one of those that you need to get rid of. And I think the main thing to note with Palace is, of course, they've got this huge game coming in game week 37, the FA Cup final. So they do need to prepare for that. But the way that these matches are currently laid out probably gives them enough rest in between each of the games to play their full strength 11 in game week 35 and game week 36 before getting to the FA Cup final. And they probably want that for rhythm. And Glasner, I think, in a press conference came out and said almost exactly that we want to be in really good form going into the FA Cup final. The last thing you want is 2 losses on the bounce against Forest and then Spurs before you go into the final against City, who have a history of doing pretty well in finals and have just beaten you 5-2. So they're going to want to play their strongest 11 unless there's any sort of injuries. As soon as there's an injury, they probably don't play that player or risk them. And other than that, I think they're still fighting pretty hard. They might probably not get into Europe, but I think for the next 2 games, players are going to try and prove a point to make sure they're in that cup final 11. And as a team, they're going to want to be in great nick going into the final anyway. By the time we get to game week 37, 38, we might want rid of them regardless. But until then, I think they're fine to hold if you want to do so. I don't think you have to hold them, but if you've got other transfers to make, then I think keeping a Sarr, keeping an Eze, keeping Mateta is absolutely fine.
Yeah, it really is about reading the tea leaves again, isn't it? Because people say, "Oh, it might be rested." Rested for what exactly? And it's not Football Manager where these players do need to kind of keep match sharpness. And as you say, kind of there's a lot of sort of qualitative factors surrounding the team, and as you noted, them going into the FA Cup final on the back of 2 losses, because they've heavily rotated, because players are being kept fit or kept out of harm's way for a game in 2 weeks, two game weeks time or whatever, and it kind of doesn't quite feel like that's the correct way of looking at it almost. And you may have, though, on the other hand, the fact that players maybe won't be playing it at full pelt and they want to be preserving themselves for what may be, for some of the players, the biggest game of their careers thus far. So that's why I kind of put it as a 2 for beachiness, Sam, really, just because there's a lot of buts surrounding every sort of assertion you can make. But I think what's most important is what comes from the manager, really. And it does seem that Palace are playing for their manager, unlike Spurs. And I think that's kind of an important consideration there. But, I think given the fact that the sort of residual ownership of these players is going to be quite high, in FPL terms, if you're chasing or if you're looking to gain an advantage, that could be an opportunity for you, because you might think, actually, well, okay, there's Spurs in 36. Maybe I don't want to be running away from my Palace players. Maybe that'd be a good sort of testing ground for them. But you might be thinking as well, maybe I'll go for different options for those games, and maybe kind of just take them on, because they're kind of not going to be effectively owned in terms of over 100% in terms of the captaincy. They're going to be still kind of fairly impactful in terms of effective ownership. But if you do think there's a different option out there, so for example, Bumo versus Ipswich, if you can get to him from Sar like I did, well, maybe that's a better kind of opportunity for you. Indeed, I went for Bowen as well, versus they'll have Man United away that week. There's quite a lot of kind of things you could possibly do there. So they're an interesting case, I think, when it comes to this. The final team within the beachy the beachy 10, I suppose, is Brentford. Their correct fixtures are United at home, Ipswich away, Fulham at home, and Wolves away. That Fulham game, Sam, could eventually turn out to be a kind of a European 6-pointer if they do really well. But all in all, it's a very, very kind of enticing run in for this season. They've got the game to play. So I think kind of I gave them one beachy depending on Thursday. If they lose to Forest, it might be that the 4 points between them and Bournemouth is too much to make up. But if it's not, if they do kind of win, or if it kind of does look like that they'll be all right, then suddenly, I don't know, it does get quite interesting. Recently, they've been okay, a little bit better defensively, but not been particularly good offensively. But with that kind of decent final four of Man United, Ipswich, Fulham, and Wolves, I'm not surprised that people might be following suit, again, looking at Bumo and Visser, which are the two that I've got.
Yeah, I mean, but Mbumo is, I think, on like 90% of all of the graphics right now, including my most recent video as well. Because looking around, I just don't have a better player to be recommending to buy right now. His data's great, 90 minutes. He's still playing to a very high level, as is Wisser. Both of these are going to be incredibly tempting options, especially if we don't get double game weeks going into game week 36. Their run is as good as any. And they are a very well drilled team at creating big chances for both Mbumo and Wisser. So again, when you've got teams that they're playing who are arguably on the beach in terms of beachiness rating, we've already discussed, they are a team that I would be targeting. So obviously we're going to wait because we might get double game week news. But other than that, I think those two are going to be very high on the transfers in, and already are looking that way. Obviously, you've brought them in early, and I completely endorse that move. I actually really rated the idea of you switching the free hit week so you can make those transfers a week early and just get them in situ when everyone else is going to be kind of chasing your tail a little bit, which is exactly what I'm doing this week.
Except most people will be doing the same chances, buying my team, but have like millions of points more than me. So.
Yeah. Well, we're both in that situation, sadly. But
we'll talk about it in a minute.
Yeah, we've got a whole section on that planned. Look, Brentford, a 1 on the beachiness right now. We have to wait for Thursday to see how they do in that game. If they win it, then they are well in the European fight. If they lose it, then it's possible that they can get back into it. But and also Thomas Frank is not going to let them think they're on the beach just because they're 4 or 5 points off of Europe, potentially. They're still going to be going for it. But they might start falling away. And then that's something to just keep an eye on. By game week 37, 38, they might be on the beach by that point. So, yeah, I think they're fine to be targeting right now. I would wait because they've got a whole match to play yet just to see if they come through unscathed. But given Wissa and Mbumos, however you pronounce it, I can't actually remember sometimes.
I say Boomo because it's like
Boomo, yeah. I think I usually say Mburmo, but yeah, it could be Boomo. Anyway, either way,
as well. So
yeah, it could be either.
He said Boomo in his videos. So
did he? Okay, we'll go. Well, he'll probably know best, so we'll go with that.
Maybe.
So on that, I think either of them, as long as they get through unscathed, are absolutely fine. They've got great fitness records, so you're probably not taking too much of a risk if you're going to be priced out with one move either way in terms of up or down in the prices in the next couple of days. But I'm probably waiting half a double game week announcements in case that happens as well.
Yeah, fair enough. So I think to take three together, you've got probably the most sort of the indie hipster teams for this year in Fulham, Brighton and Bournemouth. In terms of what kind of their final four fixtures, Fulham have got Villa away, Everton at home, Brentford away, and City at home. So decidedly mixed bag there. Up in the just on equal points with them, you've got Brighton, who are on Newcastle at home, Wolves away, Liverpool at home, and Spurs away. So again, mixed bag. And then dear old Bournemouth, Arsenal, Villa, City, and Leicester. So all eyes on them in game week 38. We'll be buying 2 free players from them. Maybe we'll see Semenyo re-enter your team, Sam. Who knows? But a team that
I hate him so much.
Yeah, a team you're probably going to be kind of missing out on for a little while until game week 38. But these teams they're all teams that we've this is where the zeros come in. We've said, they're not on the beach at all. They've got a lot to play for, despite ironically Brighton and Bournemouth both having beaches in their cities. But I mean, it's one of, I think it's these are kind of teams where, yes, okay, the motivation is going to be there, and I think that's kind of quite a positive thing. The other side of it really is that the fixtures, I think, are still going to dictate our interest. And when it comes down to it, we're really interested in Brentford because the fixtures are, as we said. But when it comes to teams like Brighton, when it comes to teams like Fulham, and for Bournemouth in particular, because you're only interested in game week 38, I think that's a really good sort of specific example of how, despite these teams if we read the tea leaves, we say they've got great motivation, but the fixtures, for whatever reason at the moment, don't quite seem to be there for us to be massively interested in them.
Yeah, agreed with that. I think the fixtures do still weigh into it, even if a team is or isn't on the beach. And sadly, I think in most cases there, the fixtures just don't suggest to me that too many of their assets are a buy right now. Some people might come into this looking at it differently and rate motivation as a much higher determining factor in how you bring in players than fixtures. And that's absolutely fair. But I think the truth behind it all is kind of a balance between the two, and trying to find that sweet spot between fixtures and motivation is where we want to grab in the last couple of game weeks of the season. So they're all fighting. They will try their very best to pick up points in all of those matches because they've got a lot to fight for. But they're still difficult fixtures, especially Bournemouth's is it, Arsenal, Villa, Man City. That's a tough 3. Then we can all steam into them for Leicester at home in the final game week, no question. But Fulham and Brighton probably very similar situation where they're probably not must sells, but I certainly wouldn't be targeting them as buys this week. And honestly, just thinking about it, I can't think who you'd even have in your side from either of them right now. I mean, there might be a couple of legacy picks hanging around, but not too many.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right, so to turn our attention to the Champions League chase then, Villa with 6 points gap between Fulham and themselves. You kind of reference them with Brighton, so a good take on them. And Forest at the moment are just outside the Champions League places. Forest on goal difference versus Chelsea, which is no surprise given how they've done this year. Villa, probably a bit of an interesting one just to start with, just because Marcus Rashford's been ruled out probably for the rest of the year. for them. He's not eligible for game week 38. So, I mean, if he's back in game week 37, it's the Spurs game and he's gone. So Ollie Watkins potentially is in the conversation. Fulham, Bournemouth, Spurs, and Man United for them. So the last 2 game weeks potentially of great interest, depending on how things go for Villa, and performing very well in terms of the underlying XG, third overall over the last 10 game weeks. So really turned it on after a bit of a different patch, I think it's fair to say. And then Forest, you've got pretty poor XG data and pretty poor XGA data, as you mentioned earlier on, Sam, but with some very tasty fixtures, 37 and 30, 36 and 37 with Leicester at home, West Ham away. I'm pretty sure, Chris Wood's going to be in it pretty much every team in game week 36 for that Leicester game at home. No, not even I, on my potentially kind of quite differential plan. I'm going to be overlooking that one. So, yeah, I mean, those are the teams sort of chasing. And then just to take it in a little bit further, currently in fourth at the moment is Chelsea. Liverpool at home this week, Newcastle away, and then end the season with Man United and Forest in 38, which is going to be, we're all hoping as neutrals that's going to be the kind of the Champions League decider almost. I don't know if you really want that for the X narrative on the final day, don't you? When we're in the pub on FPL meets for that day. I don't know. Interest, I suppose. Chelsea-wise, I think kind of most people are going to just leave that be because the fixtures are pretty bad. And if you haven't got Palmer, I don't think you're going to be kind of buying anyone, really. And
No.
Forest-wise, I suspect most people have still got their defenders hanging around. Chris Wood would have gone recently, but I suspect he may be coming back for a lot of people. And then Villa-wise, I suppose maybe Watkins is of vague interest there.
I'll tell you what, until just now, I hadn't really even considered buying Chris Wood at all for the rest of the season. I don't really care that much about that one fixture in game week 36. He's been, well, we'll see how he does in game week 34 because we still haven't played that game yet, but he hadn't even come into my mind, to be honest, at this point. I'm much more interested in Ollie Watkins if Rashford is indeed out for the remainder of the season. The data is just so much better. And those final 2 games of the season, Spurs and Man United, I really like. Forest, obviously, they're fighting and they've got a lot to play for. They've also got the game in hand, so they could be on 61 or 63 points come game week 35 and be in a more secure spot fighting for Champions League. But at time of recording, they are still scrapping and the data's looking pretty poor as of the last 10 game weeks. So I just wonder if teams have figured them out a little bit, if they've dropped off slightly. They might be able to scrape their way and just get the results they need to get over the line. They've not got bad fixtures. Crystal Palace, Leicester, West Ham, absolutely fine. And then Chelsea, like you say, that could be a bit of a final day winner takes all kind of match, in which case form kind of goes out of the window with that one. And you're playing with subjective things like your heart and your passion and the fans behind you and all of this, and they're playing at home. That could be a great game. In terms of buying, I think I'd probably be more tempted to be buying Aston Villa players right now than Forest based on the form, but I can see an argument for Chris Wood. I've got Milenkovic already. I think that's fine to have a defender in there, even though their data has dropped off a cliff. That Leicester game is probably a clean sheet fixture. Outside of that, yeah, I get Chris Wood and I'll think about it more, but it wasn't top of my list. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, no, I feel that completely. To turn the attention finally, because we're running on time to the top of the table. So Liverpool, interesting one. I think most of the exposure is going to be to Salah, and I suspect he's just going to stay there. Reading the tea leaves, I was listening to Clash, the kind of the fan view on Planet FPL with Dan, their Liverpool correspondent. He was saying Salah's going to want that record for goal involvements this year. Fair enough. But I don't think we're going to be looking at them really any further. Chelsea, Arsenal, Brighton, Crystal Palace, the last 4 games this year. Giving them a free for beachiness rating. I think that's kind of pretty fair. Won the title, not very much else to play for. Top of the shop for XG and SGA, but so. And I wonder whether the investment is going to go elsewhere, really, from them, or at least the focus, because the investments were going to already have gone. Arsenal in second, we've given them a 2 beachiness rating. It depends how it goes next weekend, really. The Bournemouth game, I think, in game week 35 is going to be quite the non-event. The only thing we can probably say confidently is that Raya is going to play because Neto can't play.
Yeah,
the rest
point.
the rest of that, I just don't know. And then they've got Liverpool and Arsenal play each other in 36, which was probably kind of the fixture computer spitting that out as a potential title decider. No. So I've got them as kind of 2 of a beachiness. And I don't know, apart from Gameweek 38, where they got Southampton, I feel like the interest in them is going to be fairly low. So if you've got your Sleepers, you've got you've sort of Hacker hanging around from Gameweek 33, all this sort of thing, then you're going to keep him probably, but just kind of be alive to the idea that, especially if Gameweek 35, it's probably not going to be the fact that he's going to be on the pitch, I suspect, or at least if he does play. I don't know. We spoke about this already with Palace, that maybe it might be the case of kind of getting that rhythm really with him, but I would not be expecting very high 8 minutes for Game Week 35. No. Newcastle, I think a lot of people are going to be kind of binning them off. Brighton away, Chelsea at home, Arsenal away, Everton at home in Game Week 38. But I think they're still kind of fairly high motivation there. There's not very much between them and Forest, and indeed them and Villa. Only 5 games, 5 points separate them. And then finally, Man City, we're probably the best run in, as we've spoken about. Wolves, Southampton, Bournemouth, and Fulham. Most are probably going to have Guardiola and Marmoush on the table. And I'm quite interested in figuring out which midfielder to go for this week, if indeed I do at all. Potential double as well on the road for Man City, I think it is, Sam, too.
Yeah, it could be a double of Southampton away, then Bournemouth at home. Again, a bit like with the Palace Wolves fixture, we'll have to wait and see in terms of announcements. It's obviously growing less and less likely by the day, but it could be pushed forward to Game Week 36 for the double, obviously giving them a blank in Game Week 37 as well. But at time of recording, again, it's just a normal set of fixtures through Game Week 35 to 38, as you just described. A good set of fixtures. But outside of Marmoush and Gvardiol, I'm not that interested in any of them. I'm not interested in a Savinho. I'm not interested in Foden, not really in KDB either. If I'm honest, I can see him starting maybe 2 of the last 4, possibly 3. But there's just so much rotation going on there that I'm just not confident enough. And Pep can change it as quickly as he likes, and we know in any given week he can play a completely different system that incorporates more wing play or takes out the wingers altogether, like he has been doing recently. And he's obviously still fighting for the Champions League spots and will have the FA Cup in the back of his mind as well. And I don't think despite the fact that KDB is leaving and they'll probably want to give him a good send-off, I think they're fighting for too much at the moment to just give him a bit of a victory lap. They need to pick the team that they think is going to win each game, and that doesn't scream to me confidence in terms of any given player starting. So yeah, they're not on the beach, but in terms of actual FPL assets, I think it's fairly limited. When it comes to Liverpool, keep Salah, don't sell him, because he's going to start every game. You'd think he might get brought off early in 1 or 2 of the games, but there's no way I'm getting rid of him. And Arsenal, like you said, it's probably, almost definitely a don't buy. And I think defensively, don't sell. I think Saliba and Raya start the rest of the games. Or possibly Timber is a sell, potentially. But Saka, I think, is a sell, sadly, because they're very much in the fight with PSG. And I think the X minutes, like you say, are pretty low. So yeah, not many beachy teams there, other than maybe Liverpool. But again, that's more of a celebratory beachy. But in terms of actual interest in fantasy players there's not that much in terms of movement. You keep the players you've got. You probably don't buy too many of any of those teams' players.
Yeah, I think that's probably kind of where it is really at the moment. I think a lot of it does, from just kind of summarize the discussion a little bit, depend on a lot of kind of reading the tea leaves surrounding motivation. We've given an idea of what a beachiness rating would potentially be, but a good shortcut is if they're below 11th place in the table, they're probably on the beach, maybe 12th if you kind of do think that Palace do have a chance of hitting that European spot. And a lot of that will depend on kind of your view, your subjective view of all of these sort of little qualitative factors, which will inform whether you're interested in buying a player. Way of kind of crystallizing that is Everton. So Ipswich up in 35, Southampton up in 37. probably really objectively fairly little motivation to do very much this year, safe from relegation. But do you kind of think, okay, they've got good fixtures and also they're playing for the manager, there's all these contextual factors surrounding them, moving into the new stadium, the final game in Goodison, game week 37 is at home to Southampton. Well, am I interested in buying and die for that game? You betcha. It's those sorts of things which are going to inform your kind of decision making. A bit of a topsy-turvy time, I think, overall, where you're not really looking at the champions of the Premier League in Liverpool. You're not really looking at kind of the historical go-tos in terms of Arsenal. You're moving away from your Newcastles. Man City still do kind of sit around, but really, it's kind of an open season towards the end, and there's going to be a lot of, I guess, luck variance. What happens on the day really informing what happens with these teams and these players going forward. And I think most of us are just going to be kind of crossing our fingers and praying for the players that we bring in, and hopefully and hoping that our read of the tea leaves in terms of what motivates players and motivates teams is going to be correct. Right, so let's do the game week preview because we're an hour in already and we've got a few things to go through. And the knee jerk this week is on the death of our seasons to some extent. I don't know if they're being dramatic or melodramatic, but there we go. And I do think the season's over for me, really. I don't know if you feel the same way, Sam. So is it time to have some fun? 56 points needed for the top 100k. I expect that's going to be about kind of 50-ish by the time the game week ends. So I'd say, barring 4 miracles, the top 100k, which is kind of the minimum criteria for successful, I think, for any season for me, is pretty much over. I know, Sam, you called time of death last week or week before. So, yeah, we'll see. I'm not going to kind of totally dissect our seasons here. But I think give us a bit of a space to mourn, maybe. I know lots of you are definitely doing better than us, and it's just to mark the season's passing, perhaps. For me particularly, chip season's been absolutely awful. I've gone from 20 points to top 100k to more than 50 red arrow in the last couple of game weeks, and I think daring to stray from the beaten path has been a mixture of unfortunate and lackadaisical, really, in some ways. But it's fair to say I only need a few kind of bits and pieces to come through. Essentially penalties. Guessing the right players for free hit 33. If I had a Trossard or a Bumo, I'd have gotten decent green, and maybe I'd be thinking about this differently, and maybe making a decision like buying and captaining Cunha or something last week if I wanted to be really differential. Could have been things which would have made me feel better about the season, or at least kind of kept me in the hump. But I feel like I've probably fallen too far behind now, realistically. And obvious question, will I do it again? I think so. Like it was a risk worth taking, in my view, having gone nowhere for weeks on end with everyone on the same strategy. But it's fundamentally, of course, been fatal for my season. I think I'm wired. Like I like taking those sorts of high risk, high reward sort of gambits. I kind of like that. It's always going to be something that's going to appeal to my spider senses and kind of just make me think, yeah, all right, I'll give it a go. But yeah, here we are, 4 weeks left. How are we going to approach it now? Still, obviously, we're going to give sound advice on the pod as if we were doing well. I think that's probably fair to say. We're not going to become a pod who assumes everyone else is taking big risks. So we're not going to be pushing the merits of wild captaincy or wild transfers every week. And we try to kind of keep it objective and try to keep it sort of main rather than kind of pushing it through our lens. But I think for us, in terms of how we're managing our actual teams, it might be slightly different. So captaining a little bit against the template, so probably from now on, and unless I get sort of 2 very, very good outcomes over the next couple of weeks, which makes you think, oh, okay, I've now got something to defend again. I'll be probably seeking out captaincy candidates 2 or 3 every week rather than kind of the chalk template captains. I've got nothing to gain really between 200k to 500k. I just think that if it ends in either, I'm still going to think, yeah, okay, it's not the best season, but to give myself the best chance, I think probably the best thing to do is to try to kind of spike that. Differential transfers in probably going to be key. Gone a bit early this week with having Visser and Bumo already from last week. But maybe kind of trying to consolidate that with different transfers into the rest. And generally, I guess, trying to have some fun. But that's all within the limits, Sam, of having accepted my season. It's pretty much over. I'm sanguine about it. I know you've had a bit more time than me to process it. But from removing myself from the FPL kind of bubble over the weekend, I think kind of let it kind of on on the back burner, just marinate. And then I kind of just think, I'm sanguine about that fact. Really, it's not going to be probably the season I want it to be, or wants any season to be. But this is what happens sometimes. It's just the nature of the game, especially if you take high risk gambits like I did. That if you bet against the house, especially with the context being like it is now, you do lose more time than you win. But it was only a couple of small things, which kind of led me to be here. Sancho scores a couple of penalties. That scores a couple of goals. Things are very, very different.
Yeah, look, I think with any good or bad season, I think anyone listening to this pod is probably a pretty good FPL manager. And there's going to be a number of you who are sat in the top 10K, top 100K, and a number of you who are also having poorer seasons that aren't up to your normal standards, perhaps, whether that be top 100K, top 10K, or even if it's top 500K, top 1 million, and you're not happy with it. And I think it is worth noting at this point, and I'm not saying that's what's happened here in either of our case necessarily, certainly not only what's happened, but there's luck involved. There's variance involved in every decision you ever make in FPL. A player can go down injured after 5 minutes that could have been the best pick that you could have possibly made, and it can go against you. So there's always a factor of that. And to play this game means that you have to accept and come to terms with, you could play everything perfectly and it still might not work out. The problem comes in, and this is where I'll start talking about my season in particular, or certainly last few game weeks, is I had those normal variance factors that happens to all managers. And then I also kind of doubled down on risks that were maybe needless at the same time, and gave myself problems that maybe I should have foreseen, or maybe exposed myself to more risk than was necessary. So Asensio, even at the time, I know 2 penalty misses is desperately unlucky. So there is a luck factor there. But I also think it was a mistake bringing him in at all, not because he missed the penalties, but because I couldn't guarantee his minutes after that one game, or that one double game week was out of the way. Actually, no, sorry. It was Southampton in a single game week. And after that, I couldn't guarantee his minutes in the double game week. So it was a big punt on it going well against Southampton. And as bad as Southampton are, a player can blank in a single game week. We know that. So I think what I want to do next season is actually, I'll reverse a little bit. Before the end of this season, because I have kind of called time of death on it, I don't think I'm getting a top 100. Maybe a minor target I'll look for is top 200K. But it's not going to be a dramatically successful season. So what I'm probably going to do for the remainder of this season is look back and dissect what mistakes I've made, not in terms of the outcome, but in terms of the actual decision making, what was flawed, whilst I'm still in FPL mode and thinking about it. Because I know what happens over the summer. I forget about like little bits and bobs that might have happened during the season. So I'm using the last few game weeks of the season to have a look back and think, okay, was player A versus B actually the right decision? Should I have brought DCL in on my wild card? In inverted commas, in brackets, no, I shouldn't have done that. Should I bring in Asensio for a 1 week punt? No. Should I captain Mateta against Southampton? Probably not. Although I think as far as mistakes go, that was a lesser one. Saka triple captain, all of these things, loads and loads of different things. I will dissect them and have a look back and see whether or not it was just a bit poor luck, or was it actually a mistake? Lots of them were mistakes. And then whilst I'm kind of stuck in 2 minds for how I'm going to play the rest of the season, Tom. So 50% of me is thinking I'll probably play the way that you're suggesting, maybe have a little bit more fun, maybe take a couple of hits and go against the grain on captaincy and on transfers. But the other half of me, and I think I said this just off of recording last week to you, is I'm thinking almost using these last 4 or 5 game weeks now as preseason for next year. I want to play in a sensible way, kind of remind myself that I am or can be a good FPL manager who makes good decisions based on sound logic. And I almost need that ego boost going into next year to prove to myself that I don't just make mistakes. I can make good decisions. Even if they don't pan out well, I can make sound decisions and kind of get myself in a mindset of how I'm going to tackle the start of next season and make that one a success without as many mistakes as I made this year. So I'm 50-50 between the two, whether or not I need the reminder for the last 4 game weeks to play sensibly, or whether, hey, I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I might as well just have some fun with it and pick the players I want to pick. Is there a difference? I don't actually know if there is. At the end of the day, I just want the players who score the most points, regardless. So that's what's going to give me the most joy and give me the most fun. So yeah, and Burmo's boring, but I think he scores the most points. So I kind of still want him. It's one of those really. I'm torn between those two paths and changing quite quickly between the two. But I kind of want to prove to myself that I still at least kind of know what I'm talking about, which has felt like something I've questioned at times this season.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I feel like you're kind of, from the way you're talking, at least, I feel like that the second option is going to be the truest one for you. It's just kind of, I feel like I know that I can do it. For me, because I've been there for a long time. It's just one of those things that, you know, this year hasn't worked out. I think I'll just try to think, well, all right, let's just try to have some fun with it, I guess, and go for that kind of captaincy option I'd never normally have considered, and go for that transfer and I never normally have considered, and see where it kind of lands. Knowing that the season's, it depends. Like, you know, said earlier on, jokingly, oh, it's gone. But I do believe there has. I think that, you know, realistically, you look at it and people might look at it and think, oh, 50 points, that's doable. But in 4 weeks, you that's just not possible. You've got to assume that the game en masse makes a huge error that you spot is an error and you contest that correctly 3 or 4 times. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think it is very much about just trying to make the best of it for the rest of the year. But you've got to do what's best for you. I mean, you've taken the Graham Potter route, basically, aren't you? And kind of just using this as the rest of your preseason. It's absolutely fair. And we'll definitely come back to this on the final pod of the season. For those still hanging around when there's not a game week left to preview. In terms of the game week preview, then, the transfers in for this week, we'll discuss a couple of players, but we've already mostly discussed them. So I think it's probably going to be quite a short one. And then just kind of give voice to assistant manager, because I know a lot of you still have that hanging around. In terms of transfers in this week, it's no surprise to anybody that you've got the usual suspects. So Bumo, over 100,000 transfers in for Bumo this year. Vissa, his counterpart, nearing 50k. So I think he's going to be incredibly popular towards the end. Cunha, after the explosion, still a lot of people seem to be playing who are reacting to these sorts of things, with the 15 points leading to him almost having kind of 60, 70,000 transfers in. Gvardiol and Marmoush make up the top 5. I don't know really how that's happened. I just every FPL engaged team that I've seen owns Gvardiol and Marmoush. So it's just one of those I think must be kind of bots effectively. I'm not too sure. And obviously they are, if you don't own them, just good hygiene factors for the weeks ahead, really, because City have got a great run, as we mentioned. In terms of sales, Cole Palmer, shock, heading the list, 60k out. And then you've got injured players or suspended players. So Robinson, I think, you know, we mentioned Fulham have got in different fixtures, absolutely fine. If you can get to Guardiola from him, absolutely fine too. Evan Nilsson and Rashford, and João Pedro as well, all being sold fairly highly. I don't know. I think we've kind of touched on these an awful lot. So maybe we can kind of save a bit of time here, Sam. There's anything you particularly want to mention?
No, not at all, other than anyone who is actively looking at buying or holding on to Palmer at this point, I am probably going to jot down as someone who just goes after the algorithm picks, because there is just no way after the free hit I could ever get on board with bringing him back in now. But he is top of a lot of the algorithms and the predicted points and all of that. So yeah, if you decide your transfers that way, fair enough. But I cannot get on board with it. I would be selling 100%. But yeah, all of the transfers in make sense. Man City hygiene picks, Brentford boys in. Probably wait until after Thursday, just as a word of warning, because you know what happens next. I also like Bowen. But until we hear more either way on double game weeks, it's quite hard to add any more flavour to this other than possibly a Watkins. I quite like to.
Yeah, I do like Watkins.
But yeah, that's about it really for now, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Assistant manager, a few of you do have that kind of left the rest of the season. Pereira guiding Wolves to lofty heights means a lot of the that's sort of the main candidate for the exit route to kind of have the rest of the season. But they're pretty much done with the table bonus actually now. I guess if you were still hunting for that, you'd be going for Glasner this week against the Nottingham Forest. I think probably is kind of the main one. But
41% win chance.
Wow, that's pretty decent actually.
Very good.
Yeah.
And sorry, on that note as well. So I can't remember who. I think it was Rob T. ran the numbers on this. If you can get a win bonus fixture of 41%, that is by far the most profitable way of using the assistant manager. And he crunched the numbers, I think, over the last 4 or 5 seasons. So yeah, that seems like a really good win for me. The Glasner at home to Forest.
40% of the time, it works every time.
There you go.
Yeah, I think obviously the key message here is wait and see if we do get any double game week 36 announcements, because then you kind of do have the 4 fixtures to play with. There are a lot of us who have played it did have. So go Pep if they get a double, for example, definitely. Yeah. Even though there's not going to be a table bonus, you're still going to, as we saw, kind of the last spate of assistant managers being played around the kind of the early 30s, you could still get a lot of kind of 20 pointers from your assistant manager, which is absolutely fine. But yeah, probably wait and see what happens. I think that you go with Glasner this week, and then kind of next week move on to whoever's looking fairly decent. So for example, Moyes versus Fulham, I think does count as a for game week 36, does count as a table bonus, and then you're kind of, I suppose, staring down the barrel of Potter versus Nottingham Forest in game week 37, and it just kind of depends whether you want that sort of bit of a boost in 38, whether you play it now or play it next week. But I mean, I think a lot of that's going to be kind of dictated by the double, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. On to bold claims. Nothing this week for either of us.
No, I mean, mine seemed unlikely. No penalties to be awarded in game week 34. Again, it was mainly just hedging, considering I had so many penalty takers. But yeah, alas, no dice there. In a way was good because you like those penalties. But yeah, none for you either.
No, I had Cole Palmer top scorer in the game week, so definitely not.
No. Okay, on to this week. I'm going fairly back to basics in terms of bold claims. I think these are your bread and butter. I'm going for a double-digit haul for Jacob Murphy, who I've just signed on Football Manager because I'm going back to play Southampton Football Manager to try and relive the glory days of last year. Got him at 6 million. Newcastle immediately transfer listed him. I couldn't believe it. So in almost testimony to Jacob Murphy's amazing season, I'm referencing him here and saying, you know what? How dare you transfer list him for 6 million? He's double-digit hauling this weekend against Brighton.
Christ, better start him over Palmer then. I've gone for the regulation pick, 30+ goals this game week. I feel like there's so much. There are a lot of teams who definitely do want it going on. So Villa versus Fulham, for example. But there are also lots of teams playing each other who don't want it. So West Ham versus Spurs, for example. So I think that there's going to be a lot of goals kind of going on this game week, basically.
One of us is scoring a point this week. I think so. I actually think both of us might get a point this week. But
we're in for the 1 in 5, that's for sure. 1 in 5 hit rate, absolutely fine with that. Best captain this week, final kind of bit of tangible, meaty FPL discussion. So lots of possibilities out there. Seems like the early chip leader is Bumo against Man United. Feels like kind of the one that most people are gravitating towards. But you've got Moosh on Friday night versus Wolves, and quite a few others sort of floating around. So you could go back to your Salah versus Chelsea. I suspect he'll still be over 100% effective ownership. I kind of have got, in terms of what I said earlier on, in terms of captaining kind of choice 2, 3, etc. I've got the captaincy currently on Jared Bowen against Spurs, because I like it. I don't know what team they're going to throw out, and despite the fact that West Ham don't really have much X motivation, or they've got a pretty high beachiness. He is the cream rises to the top, right, in those sorts of unpredictable games, and he's got a couple of 9-pointers in the last kind of couple of weeks, and still looks kind of fairly like, he's just a good player, effectively. Who's a talisman for his team, etc., which is why I brought him. I know that most people probably will be looking at Bumo this week, though, Sam.
Yeah, but Mbumo, for me is definitely up there. Obviously, I don't have him at the moment, but if I bring him in, he will be in the captaincy consideration. I also quite like Isak away at Brighton, although he hasn't been perhaps in the greatest of form recently. I think even Eddie Howe said he possibly isn't at the top of his game right now, in the most recent press conference as well. So yeah, maybe another week of rest will get him back up to full fitness and he'll be ready to tear Brighton apart. But we'll see. Brighton have been quite leaky recently. Conceded 2 against West Ham, which I think makes it 13-5 that they've conceded. So not far off of 3 a game over the last 5 game weeks. So I don't dislike that. And also fed into my Jacob Murphy bold claim a moment ago. But Marmoush at home to Wolves, not bad. And there's one tweet that I think it was Magnus Carlsen all those years ago just said never go fancy, just don't go against Salah kind of thing. And as long as he's in the conversation, I think you should definitely at least consider it. He hasn't been in the greatest of nick recently himself, considering he's only scored 1 open play goal in I think 10 game weeks now. But I think even like if you watch the game, it felt like everything Liverpool were doing were just trying to feed Salah for chances come the end of the game. And it was just like, okay, we're in full party mode. Let's get Salah's record as quickly as possible as well. He needs a goal, so let's just feed him. Darwin, I cannot believe he didn't shoot from the angle he had on and just put it across. And
Yes.
again, it just felt like any other iteration of Darwin would have just shot there. But he saw Salah out the corner of his eye, and it felt like at least they've all kind of not got given instruction to, but feel almost beholden or like they need to try and get Salah over the line for the record as well. So I just wonder if there's something there. And also Chelsea, I got a bit deep into some YouTube Tactico videos during the week, Tom. I don't know whether that's good or bad for my health. But they seem to be getting broken on quite quickly now, quite often. And I always, the first player I think of when I think of those, well, 2 is Son of seasons past with Spurs, but more importantly, Salah. And if they can break quickly on Chelsea and Salah can get in behind, I quite like that. So I wouldn't be against going with Salah, basically, long story short. But Mbumo probably alongside Isak, the 3 that I'm considering. I'm not really considering Marmoush. Maybe I should be, but I think the 3 that are in my mind are Mbumo, Salah, and Isak right now.
Yeah, Marmoush, I think, given the fact that he does seem to be kind of being fielded a little bit like Gakpo as the wide forward, as kind of the inside forward on the left, does kind of slightly change things for me in some ways. And does also kind of bring Kevin De Bruyne into the discussion, especially when we turn to our teams and plans. And maybe I should mention this in the transfers in, because he could be an interesting kind of player to look at for the final stretch. I mentioned City have got a very good set of fixtures. We might get a little bit of intel on Friday night from the usual suspects, and plus they've got Southampton in 36. So if you're really looking to go properly risky, devil may care, don't really care about X minutes, I'm just going to kind of just do it. And if you do get a kind of an indication that De Bruyne is going to play, then that could be a really interesting captain as well. I'm pretty cold on City for captaincy this week. I just feel like there's a lot of buts given Marmoush's kind of positioning. You're not going to captain anyone else, probably other than De Bruyne, or be interested in anyone other than De Bruyne in terms of bringing players in, Savinho, Grealish, etc. As you said, not particularly interested earlier on. It'd only be De Bruyne for almost nostalgia's sake that I'd be of any interest in. But I do feel like I feel like it's going to be Bumo, Salah, maybe Marmoush, and then in fact I'm pretty sure we'll see a lot of people on Marmoush, and then probably someone like a Bowen being option 3 or 4. No, I don't mind kind of going against that because after all, Brentford do play. They've had a 12-day rest, so they're not going to be knackered. No way in hell. And they're going to have a lot of the ball, I suspect, on Thursday. They go into the game on Saturday. I think Sunday, kind of the 2 p.m. Is their game. But there's no worries about Bumo's kind of fitness, etc., for that game. So yeah, absolutely fine to go with him. I just kind of feel like it's equal opportunities, I think, between him and Bowen, given the fact that they've got United and Spurs respectively for those 2 games. So yeah, I mean, lots of possibilities. It really is an open sort of slot this weekend in terms of captaincy, and those can give good opportunities basically going forward for advances, but I'm sure that Bones just can get a red card, miss penalty, and could probably get injured as well. Given my luck recently, it's over, Sam. It's over. In terms of teams and plans, just to round off the pod.
You're mine first, I think. Is that mine? Yeah, it is mine. Yeah, it's still got Asensio, so yeah, it's mine. So I've got double Arsenal defence at home to Bournemouth. I think they both play, but it's not without risk. If Saliba didn't start, then I just rely on Milenkovic on my bench, and that's fine. Saliba's not coming off the bench, or if he does, that's very unlikely. All home fixtures in my back 4, actually. So Raya and Saliba both at home to Bournemouth, Munoz at home to Forest, Gvardiol at home to Wolves. Not going to move on or even consider not starting either Gvardiol or Munoz. Happy with both. Into the midfield, Salah, Saka, Murphy and Sarr. Happy to start Murphy again, considering my bold claim. I'm actually pretty bullish on Newcastle attack this week. And Sarr, I don't love having him starting this week. I think it's fine. And I certainly have him starting ahead of Asensio. But maybe that's something I could consider looking at. The one player there that probably does need moving on is Saka. Which is fortunate that he's so expensive, because it means that I can just go straight down to Mbeumo or Bowen or KDB if I wanted to, or whoever, basically. Obviously, most likely Mbeumo, barring any sort of double game week announcements. And then up top, it's Marmoush, Mateta and Isak. So, overall, I've landed okay coming off the free hit. I think that obviously Saka's probably looking likely to be a sell, but I've got the replacement in mind. And then a lot of it will come down to captaincy and whether or not I want to maybe like force my hand a little bit more and try to mold my side a little bit more aggressively this week. Maybe take a hit to bring in a Wissa or a Cunha or a Watkins, to maybe, like you hinted at earlier, roll the dice a little bit, play more aggressively for a bit more fun, and try to bring in players ahead of the curve. So it's something in the back of my mind, but Mbeumo's the bread and butter, and we'll probably decide on a hit later on in the week, depending on double game weeks.
Yeah, fair play. No, it looks pretty good and sounds pretty good as well. So for me, really good team this week. I think I've kind of almost landed with Zod in the chat said I captained Bowen twice this season. Both came in, so that's always good moral support there. Thanks, Zod. Raya in goal, Gvardiol, Munoz and Milenkovic. I think I'll play Munoz over Livramento, just because of the attacking kind of promise as well. Depends on if we get any news on Aina, that might be something that would make me kind of rethink that, but I think I'm pretty happy with that. Bowen, who's got the armband at the moment, and Bumo's got the vice. Palmer, still got him, Sam, he's still there. And Salah in midfield, and then Isak, Marmoush and Wissa up front. I think I've got a slot to potentially play with, which is Palmer. What do I do with him? Do I leave him there for a week, get 2 free transfers? If there is a double that's announced, I'm definitely going to roll it and just give Palmer another week. And just Stockholm syndrome at this point.
Murphy.
It's Stockholm syndrome at this point. I could do, but I think I just leave Palmer in there, I think. But if not, I think that there's a slot open there. I think it's probably got De Bruyne's name on it, just to kind of see what happens really with him. I don't see many other players that I really want to buy in this week. If McNeil were Everton, we're in this sort of area, Sam. These are the players that we're thinking about. If McNeil at Everton had started, or if I can be convinced by something about like a player like Doucouré or something who hasn't signed a contract, maybe I'll be looking at them this week. There's no way I'm signing like a Leicester midfielder, for example, because I think Southampton's actually going to win that. But am I going to buy a Southampton player? Probably not as well.
No.
So it really does sort of zero in on maybe a De Bruyne, especially if we do get a double announcement, actually. yes, I might roll it, but also I might just think, you know what, I'm going to get De Bruyne and hope I'm a week ahead of everybody else if he does get the nod for those games. I don't know. I don't think that him leaving is going to necessarily mean Pep doesn't use him because the formation's been using fairly well. I think he started the last 4 or so in the league. So yeah, not too sure what I do yet. Could roll, could take a punt this week. I'd be rolling not because I think that I'm being conservative. I'd be rolling because I'd be like, well, you know what, Parma, big game versus Liverpool. Maybe this is the week where the form does turn round.
It could be. It could be. I mean, they do play better against sides that almost take more possession off of them, and Chelsea can break a little bit more quickly. So if Parma can find a bit more space with those fast transitions, fast breaks, then maybe his luck could be in. And I think a lot of Chelsea's problems in the most recent 7 or 8, 9 games has been because teams have low blocked them a little bit, let them press forward in the 5, and they've not really had the space in and around to like try and break that low block. So
yeah, definitely.
I think that Palmer against a higher line Liverpool on the transition might not be terrible. You could keep him, and that could be your edge piece in itself.
Maybe. I think that's kind of likely at the moment, actually, over kind of getting De Bruyne in, just because we'll see what happens in 36. I think there's probably be some interest in different players then. And also, really, I mean, I'm probably going to be looking at selling Isaac that week for Woods, and then maybe I'll be looking at another Forest player or something like that. Anything to kind of help me along the path, effectively. But yeah, there we go. Let's see what happens when we get to Friday. Don't forget, Friday deadline, because it's the 8 p.m. kickoff between Man City and Wolves. That's everything.
I had actually forgotten that, Tom. So I probably wouldn't have missed it completely, but I didn't actually remember that. So I thank you for the reminder. Hopefully, it's helpful to one of you out there as well. In the meantime, thank you all so much for listening. We have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Blue Sky at WGTA or FPL Pricey. WGTA_FPL or FPL Pricey on Twitter, X. Instagram and Threads is WGTA.FPL. Again, I'm FPL Pricey on there. If you enjoyed the pod, if you could give us a follow on those social channels, and of course, if you could also give the pod a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, wherever you're listening, and leave a like and hit subscribe on YouTube. That would all be very, very appreciated.
Yep. Thanks, everybody, for listening and watching. I feel a bit better again now, although, yes, I do. Sanguine. I'm sanguine about it all. Philosophical, phlegmatic, all of these sorts of words. I will try to have some fun as the season ends. We hope it's just you think about beachiness ahead of the run-in, and we'll be back this time next week. Don't forget the Friday deadline. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist?